Wow, it's good to see you guys keep coming. CREST 3. So, what are you learning? What have you learned? You think from 1 and 2? What are your chief takeaways from 1 and 2? We talked about in 1. We talked about going out into the world and seeing the world differently and seeing opportunity where others may not or will not or cannot. And then in session 2, we talked about how to then go back and package that deal. So once you see that opportunity, you create a vision around it. Go on in. You create a vision around it. And then how do you package it and present it to your principals, whether they're buyers, sellers, investors. So that was session 2. I'm going to ask you guys what your takeaways from 1 and 2 were, but just to introduce 3, we're going to be talking about the next step. So you've presented it, you found an opportunity, you've presented the package. Now I need you guys to have a full understanding of what your role is, because it's much more expanded than residential real estate or a residential transaction. There's a lot more to it. You may find yourself doing things and then wondering, am I supposed to be doing all this? And more often than not, the answer to that question is yes, you are. And we'll get into why and how, what that looks like. But first, again, let me ask anyone want to volunteer what your primary takeaways from sessions 1 and 2 were? Yeah.
Create the opportunity, meaning have a mindset to when I'm out that I have to see the opportunity and be able to capitalize on it.
So do you find yourself out there looking around a little bit more, trying to see and discover opportunities where it may rest? Are you being more observant, I guess, the word would be, and then applying that through a commercial scope?
Right.
Anyone else having similar experiences out in the street? Like, we look like a CIA agent. Oh my God.
Never know.
It might be. It could be. I'd buy that. Very intelligent, very stealthy, and damn, he looks good. All right, good. Thank you, Meredith.
You're welcome.
All right, so how about, that was session 1. How about session 2? So now you've seen that, you've been observant, you've used your commercial powers of observation, and you've seen something that might fly. And you're thinking, okay, now I've got to take it back. You've identified potential targets or players, so who might have a vested interest in or predetermined interest in pursuing this type of opportunity. You've got those people presumably in your database. If you do not currently, then you're working on that, I will presume. So now you've packaged the deal and you got to figure out, okay, and it's okay, you don't have to have one set of players. You can package a deal and think of a list of potential players who might have an interest in the opportunity, and you can present to all of them. You know, you're out there basically bird dogging for yourself, looking to sell your vision or present your opportunity for this particular asset or property or whatever it might be. To whomever would be a good fit for it in your database or outside of your database. So, anyone having any current situations where you're doing that, where you're actually presenting or even trying to package the deal at this point? Anyone at that stage right now? Jacinda?
Packaging it?
Well, not just presenting, kind of like presenting the opportunity or configuring the opportunity for presentation.
I'm trying to put that together now.
Okay.
But yeah, I need help with the
Yeah, let me know if you need help.
breaking it down and how to present it. That's where I'm at, because I want to get it out there quickly and be able to, like you said, I mean, last session you talked about every person involved needs to know what they're getting out of it or how much they need to put in.
Right.
So I need just put it all in the package.
Okay. Well, let me know if you need help as you're trying to progress through that. I can certainly assist. What kind of deal is it?
It's the big industrial.
Oh, okay. All right, yeah, let's talk about that.
Okay, yeah.
And maybe when you get closer, we'll set an appointment and we'll sit down and we'll kind of, we'll actually configure your opportunity package and figure out and discuss also who you're going to present that to.
The person I'll be on.
Okay. All right. Can you guys take one and pass it along and keep one so I know what I'm talking about?
Believe me, when I eat this chocolate, I get dizzy. I can never finish the whole Snickers.
So as I said, you're gonna get a copy of these. It's an LOI, and it's gonna be a significant part of the training today. But we're gonna start. Can you kill one of the light switches? Just hit one of them. Doesn't matter which one. So your role, bringing the deal home. This is how you bring it home. Understand that your role is totally hands-on. There is no, well, that's the title's responsibility, or no, that's this guy, or that's the listing agent's responsibility. If you find an opportunity, you bundle and package that opportunity for presentation, and you're presenting it, then it may not always be the case, but I'm going to presume that you're presenting that package to both sides. And you have an opportunity in that presentation to potentially double end the deal. So there is no listing agent. You are both sides. You're the listing agent, the selling agent. You have a fiduciary to both sides of the deal. But that's not where it ends. I mean, you're totally hands-on in every aspect of the transaction. This consists of continued follow-through, continued diligence as needed, so your job doesn't stop when you're in contract in terms of assisting your client with diligence. In a commercial transaction, you want to be the liaison, a chief facilitator, a guide, a coordinator. You want to coordinate site visits. You might have to be there for site visits. It's not like a home inspection is the one thing that's going to be going on, or the pest inspection, and you show up there for a couple of hours, and you're just kind of like on your phone, and then he says, "Okay, I'm done. I have to report to you out in a few days or whatever." That's not how this works. That's how residential works. And we're going to get into the various types of inspections that are more common to commercial that have nothing to do with residential. Just keep in mind that the vision was yours. These people were happily going about their lives until you disturbed them with this awesome opportunity. So you've got to stick with it. They're looking to you to continue the proliferation of the vision. And that's a good point there. The vision was born of your imagination, your expertise, and your skill set. Keep that in mind, because remember, you're dealing with the clients who don't necessarily possess that skill set, that expertise or experience even inside this wheelhouse. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, but either way, you've got to carry the ball. So what may seem to be above and beyond is simply par for the course in commercial real estate, and that's the greater point I wanted to make with this slide. You're going to come across a lot of things that you find yourself, like I said, what the hell, am I supposed to be doing all this? Why am I getting paid more to do this? Well, you are, because it's a larger deal, presumably. If I can use our example, yesterday I took a drive down to Stockton and met Rich, and met with clients in a city office. What was it?
County is county
recorder. And it was a discussion about a transaction. I won't go into detail, but you're sitting there and you're thinking, okay, in a residential transaction, when would you be in a city office or a county office talking to the recorder? The answer is likely never. That would just not happen in a residential transaction, but there we were. It served a purpose. It was a great meeting. There was a lot of takeaways from it for everybody at the table. And that's just commercial real estate. And that's what you're doing. Rich is doing this to facilitate the deal. There's more to the deal. Remember, we talked about the greater opportunity besides just the buy and sell in session 2. We talked about potentially having opportunity beyond the buy and sell, where you can be a developer or a project manager, a fee developer for your client. So you manage the project. They buy raw land, you manage the land entitlement or the land development, even up through vertical build out. We can do that. So you can actually represent that to your clients, because here we can do that. It's a service that we can absolutely provide. And by the way, you do get paid for that. Quite nicely, actually. And then beyond that, if you're constructing a commercial center or a retail center or even just a strip, There's the opportunity for property management of that asset beyond that. There's certainly an opportunity, because you've built it, there's certainly an opportunity to become the master leasing agent. So you got a commission on the buy or sell, or maybe both. You get paid handsomely for the project management during and throughout the development. And then when the asset is standing there, it's got to be leased up. You need to be talking to commercial tenants, regional tenants, credit tenants, Subway, anchor tenants maybe. And you've got to settle these leases, and you've got to lease this place up. So if you're the master leasing agent for the site, you benefit fiscally from all of that leasing activity. So that's just three typical stages of a deal where you have an opportunity to earn throughout. And by the way, what you're really doing throughout is you're maintaining a relationship with that client. Because if they can buy raw land, capitalize it to entitle it, capitalize it to build it, and then hold that asset, and that's a worthy client that's probably going to give you more or future business if you can do a good job and maintain a relationship. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Also, I was thinking too, I know the gentleman we met was adamant about no exchanges, but that's the first thing I'd think of too. Whoever's selling it, they're gonna have to do an exchange probably. There's another client.
It's just this particular client is adamant against it, but that's not the norm.
No.
I mean, he's very savvy in terms of his primary focus on wanting to protect himself from any tax implications or gains taxes. So he's a different kind of client.
Definitely.
But the average client, you're right, the exchange was the first thing on my mind until he shut that down pretty quick. He's like, nope. It's like, oh, okay. Well, plan B. But, like I said, he's a savvy guy. He's not your typical client. I mean, he's,
Go throw the smart work.
yeah. It's good to work with intelligent clients. It's one of the other things I love about commercial. The ultimate liaison. You represent the interests of all. Remember, I'm presuming that you found this opportunity at a red light. It was nothing. There was no opportunity. The property wasn't for sale. It was just sitting there. So you approached the owner to get them to consider selling. You approached prospective buyers or investors or developers to interest them in the opportunity to do something at that site. So I'm presuming that you're representing both sides. You're double-ending the deal. So when you see comments like that, that's what I'm referring to. You represent the interest of all. Be the architect of each principal's agenda. So remember, you've got different principals at the table. It's a shared vision, but they all have their own agenda. They all have their own expectation of benefit. And with a dual fiduciary, you already know that doesn't change from residential to commercial. With a dual fiduciary, you have a responsibility and obligation to both. It's kind of easier when all the interests are aligned. So when everybody at the table wants to see this project through or agrees that this vision is a great opportunity for me, for my own reasons, for them, for their own reasons, for them, for their own reasons, but we all agree that we want to see this thing through. So the interests at the table are aligned, even though the agendas are separate. Everyone involved has an interest in seeing it through. Everyone at the table has the merits, or has seen the merits of it all, but from their own perspective. In other words, they agree that, yeah, this is a great opportunity from my individual perspective to get rid of this asset. This is a great opportunity from my perspective to develop, another one of my, charter shopping centers or whatever. So everyone sees the vision, but from their own perspective, and that's how they see the benefit as well. So as the facilitator in the middle, representing everybody's interest, you've got to make sure that you're doing just that, representing everybody's interest. And sometimes that comes at a cost. Sometimes there's pain involved in that, but you've got to be that one that is kind of like the glue between the parties. Deals require compromise. It's not always easy to get your clients to see that or flow with that. Process flow creates questions. The answers can serve one party or the other or the deal. Does that make sense to you guys? So when you have questions come up in a transaction or in a negotiation, you're going to get the answers because that's your job. The question is, internally, is who do the answers serve whose agenda at the table do the answers serve? Do they serve, and they can serve one party, a buyer or the owner, or they can serve the deal, which is the greater opportunity. The right answers will most often serve the deal.
So when you say questions, what type of questions are you talking about?
Could be anything. Could be a realization or getting clarity on what's allowable here zoning wise. What we have to do to get this easement through here to service the back end of the acreage. It could be anything.
Cost of improvements, right?
Yeah.
That's our major issue right now.
Yeah. Say that again.
The cost of improvements.
Right. So cost of improvements, and you know we're going through that on 80 South, so you've got debate or question or ambiguity regarding the cost of improvements, and that's going to affect everybody. If it's too high, if it's fits in the budget, those answers will either serve the deal, the buyer, or the seller. If they serve the deal and everyone's interests are aligned, then most commonly that's going to serve everybody. This was a takeaway from our meeting yesterday. I had this presentation done, and I added this slide. Every once in a while, commercial, like I said, you meet people with great wisdom. And I'm never ashamed to say that I learn stuff every day. And I learned this yesterday. Anyone want to hazard a guess before I reveal it? What's the difference between a good deal and a bad deal? No comment from Rich there. Anyone want to hazard a guess? I'll just show you. Hopefully we'll make sense of it together. So a good deal is when both parties walk away feeling just a bit disappointed. If that doesn't make sense to you, let's talk about it. A good deal is when both parties walk away feeling just a bit disappointed. That previous slide about questions, where I said the question, the answers can serve one party, the other, or the deal. If it serves the deal and both people are just a little bit disappointed, that's serving the greater purpose, which is the deal, the transaction. If it serves just one person, the other person's like, well, this sucks. I'm like, not for me. That's not a good deal.
So basically, even though you're saying both parties are a little bit disappointed, it's still, the deal in itself became a win-win.
What is compromise? Yeah. What is compromise? By definition, compromise, if you and Rich are engaged in a negotiation or a transaction and we hit a sticking point and you compromise, that means you both gave a little to make the deal work. That's compromise. That's an example where both parties, okay, you didn't get 100% of what you wanted or were shooting for, but you got 98. You walk away just a little bit disappointed. Both parties walk away equally just a little bit disappointed. That's a good deal. A bad deal is when one party walks away feeling disappointed and the other one's like bouncing on cloud nine. That's not a good deal. I mean, would you agree?
Absolutely. It's a fair deal.
Yeah, a fair deal. Everyone's interests are served equally. Always remember when double ending, you bear a fiduciary to both sides. I keep stressing that because it's important. You can't favor one client or one agenda over the other.
It's very tricky.
You've got to represent each client, each interest equally. Lots of moving parts. This is going to take us a little bit of time, but that's okay. We have plenty. Components of a typical commercial real estate transaction. Now, to some degree, it's kind of like a residential transaction. There's a contract, or there's a buyer and a seller. There's a contract to bind them, the two of them, with regard to terms and their obligations within the deal. There's an asset that's up for disposition. So in residential, it's a house. In commercial, it could be anything, literally anything. A business with no real estate, a lease scenario, could be anything, any type of asset, any type of property. There's an escrow, there's disclosures. What else is in a regular real estate transaction on the residential side? What's that?
You said purchase agreement, you said disclosures, addendums,
Just thinking like REST and all these liability things. I don't have to do them, but I
No.
know that's a lot of fun.
I'm just trying to demonstrate or illustrate that there are extreme commonalities between residential and commercial transactions. It's still real estate. We're not jumping out of the, off the cliff here, guys, talking about some other form of rocket science. We're still within the realm of real estate and your representation as a real estate licensee. But the items in a commercial deal are a little bit different, and you need to know this, because who's gonna advise your clients on this process flow? You got it, it's you. They look to you to be the expert, so in this room, we need to get you to a level to where, it's not a level of expertise, certainly, because that takes years, and certainly several transactions. But what we're trying to get you to is where a level where you can advise your clients of at least the process. When they say, okay, so what's next? You can't say, yeah, that's a really good question. What's next?
I'll say it's called Dameon.
You can do that. You can do that. Of course you can do that for now, but I want to get you guys to a point where you don't need to.
you would submit a LOI, right?
There you go. And we're gonna, like I said, it's gonna be a heavy part of today, so we're gonna get through that. But these are some of the similarities: contracts and docs. Airform is a commercial real estate. Airform CRE stands for commercial real estate. It's a commercial real estate document library. You're all familiar on the residential side with your wind forms library, your car forms. Airform is a specifically commercial one, but it's kind of like trendiness. I mean, you don't have to have Airforms to do commercial. It's just not necessary. It's not required. The car forms suffice nicely. And it's,
Some people ask for it.
yeah. So what you get in the commercial arena is you get a lot of people who've heard of it, or maybe they did a deal before last year or whatever, something with it, and they're like, yeah, can you use Airforms? You have Airforms? Because they think that that's what they have to ask you as their commercial real estate agent. And you can say, yes, we have access to Airforms, but advise them intelligently. The reality is that Airforms were designed and drafted in such a way that the verbiage or the clauses overwhelmingly support the seller. So if you're representing a buyer, you don't want to be asking for Airform. You want to be saying, hey, can we use Carform? We don't need to go Airform here. Now, it's not unfairly advantageous to the seller, but the contracts are slated or leaned with a favorability degree to the seller. It's just the way they're written. And anyone who's been through law school or worked for a lawyer or a law firm, drafted contracts from scratch can tell you that there are things that you can insert. There are clauses or language that you can put in that favor one side over the other. Even in a boilerplate templated type contract scenario, you can see clear favoritism toward one side or the other. In Airforms, typically, I don't know why, I have no explanation as to why, but they typically favor the seller in a buy-sell scenario.
You mentioned that before, and I didn't know that, and I've never used them because we made our own contracts, but
Yeah.
now when I'm thinking about it, if I'm dual representative, I might even have an issue there if I know this.
Yeah. And in a scenario like that, you can use the Airform,
Mm-hmm.
but you can protect your buyers, for your fiduciary with the buyer through addendums,
Yeah.
exhibits that you're adding on, additional clauses or language, or just pay attention, because most of those items where it's favorable or more favorable to the seller, it's not just strict verbiage or a clause. It's a clause with check boxes, and then there are defaults. So the defaults in an Airforms contract may typically favor the seller. If you check the boxes in that clause or get away or escape the defaults, now you've got a more balanced contract. So you can still use
You can
Airforms.
strike through what you don't want.
Right. I'm just telling you guys, be aware of how they're sometimes slated, especially if you're representing the buyer or both, and understand that you can work it so that the Airform is balanced toward both interests. But you've got to be aware of it. Otherwise, you're just going to be going down the contract, and you're going to leave all the defaults in place, and you're going to end up with a contract that favors the seller. I said, it's a commercial real estate library. I think it's kind of cool, but like you said, don't get hung up on it to think that you have to have an air form if you're doing a commercial deal. You'll look through the Win Forms library, which is much more extensive, and you'll find that, you know, just like they say there's an app for that, you look through the Win Forms library and say, hey, there's a document for that. Anything you can think of is in there, commercial or otherwise. So get prepared for much deeper diligence. You guys understand that in a transaction, you know, in a house for a residential home, there's inspections, a pest inspection or termite or whatever. You're looking for dry rot, infestation, anything of that nature. And it typically takes, you know, one afternoon and then you're done. Then you get a report and there's phase one or whatever, things that need to be cleared or could be cleared, and you get into negotiations for seller or buyer credit to take care of these things, whatever. So this is the process. And that process is very similar to commercial. It's just that in commercial it's much more involved, a lot more to it. And you need to be aware. So the key word is deeper. It's a much deeper diligence in commercial. Contingencies and contingency periods differ in commercial real estate. So you have contingency periods. You have a loan contingency or finance contingency period. You have inspection contingency periods. Typically they're longer. Anyone know what the average contingency period is in a commercial transaction?
At least 6 months.
90 days.
At least 6 months.
It could be 6 months. The average is 90 days. Some get it done in 45 on less involved properties like raw land, where you don't need an EIR.
Our two contracts, two LOIs we had in Livermore, it was like 2 years. So, but there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, and then they could, and so when you hear that and you see that, I don't want you guys to fall out of your chair in shock and be like, oh my God, what did I do wrong? There's nothing you did wrong, it's just the nature of the beast. Some transactions based on the asset type or what's involved in the deal, the diligence period, the contingency periods while you're in contract can be much prolonged. So it's
Even,
just,
our land in Lathrop, it took 2 years and 2 days to close, and we had a 180-day due diligence period, but there was options to extend. There's like 4.
yeah.
They utilized everyone, and then even amended it for some more.
So repeat that for everybody so I'm not sure everyone heard that.
So often they'll put extension, like optional extensions for their due diligence period, contingency period, and so you get to that end date, and they're still not sure if they want to use this property, if it's going to work. That's the day they'll make or break their deal. So they'll have options in there. They'll put another deposit in, minimal amount, and then they'll get whatever the option is, another 60 days, and they'll keep exercising those as long as they can. And primarily for me, it's been whether or not the specific use will be allowed, so whether it's permits or rezoning. And if that doesn't work, well then it's going to be a horrible deal for the buyers. So they either have to bail out or extend it.
Because that usually takes longer, right?
Well, it depends on what it is, especially if you need rezoning, or you gotta go with the city and get the permission, right, or special use permit.
You run into any like value issues that long of escrow or did it have to be appraised or?
No, I haven't had to deal with any appraisals fortunately, but it was just lucky.
That's good.
Yeah.
So the option to extend, what you were talking about, is it standard to do 60 more days, or it can be, it's open to whatever the two agree to?
45 to 60 per option usually, and 2 to 3 of them.
And then is it also a compromise on if they have to have increase their deposit?
Well, so it'll all be written in the original contract, because it's not in the terms of the original contract, they kind of have to pay to amend their contract, right? But they would-
So that's something
So you wanna do it ahead of
we
time?
would even talk about.
You're gonna
ahead of
hash that
time.
out in the LOI.
Yes.
If
Yeah.
you were to extend,
Mhm.
there would be an increase of
Right.
deposit of XYZ amount.
Right, so you might put in your LOI, you want 4 extensions for this amount of time with this extra deposit, and then the buyer would just respond, no, we'll give you 2, maybe this amount, this amount of days, and then they would come to a compromise, just like everything else.
It could be a partial forfeit of the EMD that's already sitting there.
Yep.
So in order to exercise this extension of another 45 days, you've got to give up,
Yeah.
3% of your EMD.
And a savvy seller will do something so they'll keep their money, like Steve did yesterday, where he had options to extend, but it was totally non-refundable. So
Yeah.
these parties were trying to develop every 3 months, they would have to deposit another 60 grand, non-refundable. And so if they bailed out, he gets to keep all that, which he did.
Right.
so he did well with that.
Yeah. So it's
First
not
time I've
just
seen that.
extending the buy time. If you're
Mhm.
extending and it's at a cost, you better make damn sure that, you know, you're moving towards something and not just trying to stall and buy time.
Yeah.
But the first EMD can be refunded if they
Typically.
back out. The first one?
Within the contingency, that's just like residential, within the contingency periods, but understand that the LOI is the backbone of every commercial contract. So whatever's discussed in here, and that's why you do an LOI in commercial, because there are so many moving parts. Way too many, you just draft up an offer and send it.
Mhm.
Because you guys would be doing addendums and modification of terms back and forth for 3 months.
Mhm.
And it'd be so marked up, you're like, we need to just scrap this and start a new contract. That's why we hash everything out in the LOI.
Yeah, contract's the easy part, that gets done
Yeah.
real quick.
Yeah. Once you have this
Getting
hashed
there.
out and everyone signs it and agrees, doing the contract is just like a formality. It's like, okay, you're checking boxes based on the LOI, based on the things that were agreed upon in the LOI. Inspections are typically different and of a different variety. Anyone want a hazard, and I'm gonna get into it, but, so these are just some of the aspects. We're gonna, on the next slide, I think it is, we're gonna talk about that variety. EIR, anyone know what that stands for?
Environment.
You got it. Environmental Impact Report, EIR. Engineers, civil, structural, etc., architects, soil test, and lots of different types of reports that have no bearing in residential real estate. So these are things you're gonna wanna know and be able to advise your client. You're also gonna want to be able to distinguish when, or differentiate when, whichever type of survey, study, report, or inspection is necessary. So some deals, some of these things don't apply. You need to know the difference.
Can I say something, because I was kind of intimidated about this, now that we do like traffic
A
studies,
lot
all
of people
kinds
are,
of stuff.
yeah.
And what I found out is the city's gonna tell us what we need to do. Basically, here's what you need to do for this site, depending on whatever the rules are. in
They'll
history.
tell you if you need to do an
So
EIR.
they'll walk you
Yeah.
through it, and you don't have to know everything ahead of time. 'Cause it could be a bit much, I still don't know what they all are, but they'll tell you, and then you hire the engineers.
But the
and
problem
get things going.
is that your client,
Mhm.
and I mean, and this is really, you know, why we're
Yeah.
trying to absorb, is that your client is going to grill you
Yes.
on all this.
And that's where
need
you,
to-
and, yeah, and that's where you get into, like I said, we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, we're gonna cover that. That's where you go to the city and you ask on behalf of your client.
Mhm.
And you're talking to clerkship, building relationships in certain counties where you work predominantly. So when you walk in there, they know you. And they know you're just there to do research or diligence on behalf of the client. And like I said, they're very helpful, they're there to assist you. If they can, they will. It's not often, I've been doing this for a very long time on the development side, sure it's happened, but not very much have I, and many times have I gone into a county or city or clerk's office and just been rudely greeted.
Yeah.
Or kind of like, yeah, get out of here. Or they're sitting there, they like when people walk in. Because, it's like, hey, somebody's.
Yeah,
Those
like-
times
Someone's
before
on
anyway,
you.
they're sitting around.
So, and they like, it's kind of like getting on a project. If they've got to go do back searches and find you a map historically or something like that in the archives, they're willing to do it. They'll do it. They'll bring you, whatever you need and offer you coffee on the table. They like having people come in. Yeah.
So it's like I have a client who's looking to purchase a property, and then I take said property address to the city, and they'll say what needs to be done.
Right, so based on what your client's interests are, they want to develop that property, or it's an end-use question, or some ambiguity on end use, whether they can do their intended end use at that facility or asset, that's something you can absolutely go into the city or county and ask. You can say, I have a client considering purchasing this asset. I just want to get some information, if I can, from your office. What's allowable there in terms of end use? So you can go there, and they'll tell you.
Okay. Makes sense.
They have no bearing in the deal, so they'll answer you honestly, they'll give you the truth. And tell you what's doable, what's not, what's likely to be acceptable, what's not. And then you can go back and then brief your client. And by the way, when you do that, your client's really impressed. So continuing with that, engineering reports, there's lots of different types of engineers and lots of different types of engineering reports, and several of them can apply to your commercial deal depending on what it is. Early in my career, we were doing the two bank buildings. If you're familiar with Oakland, on Hagenberger Road, the two bank towers, they were 20 stories. They were right next to each other. One was Wells Fargo and one was B of A on Hagenberger, and the owner was selling. And my wife and I were part, and another partner and my brother also were part of the diligence team representing the buyer. So we had to go in there and do a lot of diligence. You can imagine we had two towers, 20 stories, 200 feet each, multiple tenants, even though they were the Wells Fargo and B of A bank buildings. Yeah, they occupied space there, those two banks respectively, but there are lots of tenants in the building. So we had to go and do estoppels and review leases, and that's just all the basic stuff. But then a building like that has systems. They've got evaporators, they've got elevators, they've got advanced, ridiculous electrical systems. I mean, you go in there and you go into the guts of a building. I know you guys have walked in the towers before, whatever city, but if you've never walked into the basement of one of these buildings where everything happens, it's an experience I recommend, because you'll have a new respect for what it takes to maintain a tower. You walk in there, it's like going into the engine room of a cruise ship. Everything is large, solid like iron, and loud. And you're walking around and you're like, what the hell is all this stuff? And you realize that all the buildings you walk in and out of probably have similar guts, but you never know it, you never hear it, you have no idea. And it's not just in the basement, it's at various points in the elevation, and it's on the roof. So you've got to have structural engineers come in, you've got to have systems engineers come in, they'll do inspections on all the major systems, like the elevator, the electrical system, the HVAC system, even security systems. So these are different inspections that you'd never dream of. What house has an elevator? Well, Prince's home had one, but you see what happened in that one.
So when we're talking about these reports, what are we talking as far as cost for some of these reports?
That's a good question. It varies. It depends on the structure, it depends on how large it is. Like, for example, on Hagenberg, our bank buildings diligence, we had one civil engineer and we had a systems engineer who came in and worked with the, it's kind of like if you watch Star Trek, Scotty, the engineer, he knows the ship inside and out. So when you send your guys in there, they're working with Scotty. Every building has a Scotty. And he's walking through with your guy and he's briefing on every aspect of the building, because he knows the building inch by inch. He knows every system in the building. So he's a valuable component within the building. That being said, it depends on what they're inspecting. Elevator inspection costs us at Hagenberger on one of the buildings $1,750. On the other building, it costs us $5,000. The HVAC and the major cooling and evaporators, those systems, those inspections were like $3,500 each. But those are big buildings, so not every commercial asset has that type of cost. Some of them could be as low as, $500.
Well, what about, let's say, a building like this, and you were doing an inspection?
The major systems in this building would be what? There's no elevator, so what would the major systems be? HVAC, electricity, security. He's got cameras throughout, and there's an alarm system. And the door auto locks electronically in the evening and reopens in the morning. That's a system. So you would want to inspect those systems. If I was a buyer looking to buy this building and Robert was selling it, then I would have a vested interest in making sure that those systems were at least inspected. Now, a lot of times in commercial assets like this, regular inspections are mandatory. So if they just had one, they've got certification of that, you don't have to bear or your client doesn't have to bear the expense of having that re-inspected. It was just done by a certified inspector. Here's the evidence of that, and that's good enough. But, to do an HVAC inspection could be several $100s.
That's not bad.
You're
I
still
was
gonna wanna
thinking-
do a pest inspection for a building like this, termite inspection, and you know how that works. It's 12,500 square feet in here, so that's gonna be a little bit more than your 3-bedroom, 2-bed house.
When you're negotiating that, how do you usually let it fall to buyer or seller? Like, do you have certain things to expect or common seller will pay for?
So you wanna find out upfront what they already have. If they've had a recent HVAC inspection, a recent elevator systems inspection, if they have that, then they can produce that in the disclosure phase, the first diligence period. And you can get a hold of all that and review it to your satisfaction.
Does it typically fall to the buyer? or how do
Typically
you
falls to the
negotiate?
buyer.
Okay.
Everything's negotiable in a commercial transaction. You can negotiate to have the seller cover the cost of whatever inspections if they don't possess recent reports or recent certifications in that regard. You can request that they cover that cost. Everything's negotiable, again, in the LOI. I mean, some of them are quite expensive and take a long time. That's where your 6 to 8 months comes in. If you've got to do soil surveys, I mean, that's chemically testing the soil. Sometimes there's certain things you want to stay away from, like if you're buying land for a developer client, and you find out that the parcel you're interested in used to have a gas station. Run very, very fast away. I don't mean that 100% of the time, but there's a possibility of problems there. You have to do now Brownsfield inspection. Anyone know what
Takes a long
Brownsfield
time.
is?
Takes a long time.
Yeah, it takes a long time, especially if they find something. Brownsfield is contamination. That's what they call a parcel or land that's been contaminated by prior use or chemicals or whatever. They call it Brownsfield. Brownsfield clearance, kind of like mold clearance, but it's Brownsfield clearance, is ridiculously expensive and takes a long time. That's where you can get into a year, 6 months, 8 months, 14 months, because it takes that long. And then once it's done, it has to be certified again to have been cleared. So if you've had a prior gas station where there were chemicals or a mechanic or like an oil changers or a mechanic or a garage or a shop like that, and maybe they weren't compliant in disposal of their oil or other hazardous chemicals, and they just kind of dumped them, that contaminates the ground. And before you can build on it, before your client can buy and build on it, they would have to clear that. So you would absolutely want to negotiate, and the seller's got to do Brownsfield clearance, because I'm not doing that. If they had a gas station there, they had tanks, subterranean tanks, maybe even if they were double walled, maybe there was a leak in removing them when they pulled them out of the ground. Maybe they're still down there. I mean, you got to find out, you got to know, but this can get very timely, very time consuming, labor intensive, and expensive. And by the way, every person that has a hand in doing that is some kind of certified expert and with some kind of certified expertise, and that costs you money. Every certificate they have costs you money.
Yeah, that's true. But you can buy the land, but then you're in a bad place if you didn't check. Right?
You can say you're screwed.
You're screwed, right? And then we're gonna look really bad.
Yeah, and you look terrible for your client. Your client's gonna be like, wait, what?
Mm-hmm.
How come I didn't know this before we closed escrow?
And then you get sued.
Huh?
Then you get sued.
At the very least. Yeah. So we covered that: electrical, elevators, security systems, corporate or franchisor approvals. Why would that be important?
Decision makers.
You plan to put a Chevron on a hard corner and you're not pre-approved, it's gonna follow your plans, especially if you got a bunch of flags right around you. What are you gonna do? And then you're gonna get out competed. Defeats the purpose.
Yeah, a bunch of flags around you. Chevron doesn't approve it, so now you got to go independent with flags around you, and you look stupid.
Yeah.
So, franchise approvals could be site. Let me just actually show you could be location or the building. So, like a Subway franchise, a Subway franchisee, they pick a site they want to lease for a Subway. Well, Subway corporate has to approve that location. You can't just even if you're granted a Subway franchise, you can't just go into any location and start selling sandwiches. It requires site approval, location approval, building approval.
So we put, just so you mentioned this, and I'm familiar with it, so on your LOI, if it was a make or
Oh,
break
yeah,
a deal, that
absolutely.
your client would have to have a Chevron, you have to put in your contingencies upon approval and all necessary permits of a Chevron gas station. You just put a gas station,
Yeah.
well, then the seller's gonna say, sorry, you've shown that you can't put it on there. So
Yeah,
very
you can
specific
open up
sometimes.
PJ's gas station.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sorry Chevron didn't approve my site, my land for your station, but the LOI says gas station. You can open up PJ's, or what's your name? Barney? Open up Barney's gas station. See how you do with the shell across the street, you know, so, yeah, it's important. The details are very, very important. Demographics, I think Rich mentioned it, talking about traffic counts, median income. You know, like certain franchises want their franchisees' locations to be in areas geared towards specific type of clientele or consumer. So they're looking at median income. They want to improve the area based on the demographics. Median household incomes, household makeup sometimes. If it's like a family type franchise, like some of those bounce houses, some of them are franchises. They're not just going to allow you to go into the industrial area of the city. They want you in a neighborhood or a community. So demographics are very important, and yes, they're reviewed and must be approved.
The tenant requirements for a lot of the nationals are like specific, so they won't even look at your property unless you send them the demographics and they fit like squarely in the parameters. They'll just throw them aside and look for something else. If you have something that fits all their demographics they're looking for, and it's easy to pull that all that up and send it to them, then they're gonna take interest in it. Then they're gonna look at, well, it's a neighborhood look like.
And you can get that from
property look
title.
like. Yep.
You can get all that from title. And by the way, if they don't fit squarely in there, and you can present a compelling case like, well, they're building 440 homes right here. They're not there yet, so they have not impacted the demographic study, the most recent prior demographic study, but they're building 400. So if you can present a compelling case, then, you know, go for it. Advise your client that it's worthwhile to go for it. But you have to be able to recognize if the case is truly compelling based on, you know, your review of the franchisor expectations, their guidelines. So if you know that, you know, here are the traffic flow counts, whatever it might be, and say the land or the center is right here on the main thoroughfare to get to the freeway, and they're building 440 homes here or 500 homes here, presumably those 500 people, they own homes, they got to go to work. They got to pass by this center to get to 99 or whatever it is. So that's going to immediately, as soon as those homes are erected and occupied, it's immediately going to affect traffic counts. So if you can present that compelling case, it's worth the effort. Even the project development plan. So if you're buying land and you're going to build a center, sometimes they want to see the plans for the development, at least renderings, or they want to see what types of points of egress and ingress they're going to have if they rent there or set up a shop there. How can they access traffic flow, or better yet, how can the traffic flow access their specific site or location or pad? So these things are all considered factors. Ooh, that was cool. Okay, so we're still in the moving parts. Title and escrow does differ. A lot within the title and escrow office to them differs. It's not really relevant or important to you. You don't even really have to know, but what you want to do is understand the type of transaction that you're doing, whether it's land, whether it's office building, whether it's retail strip, whether it's going to be heavy on the lease up. You want to understand the nature of your transaction so that you can then seek a title and escrow team that have that specific experience. So understand that there are many types of commercial deals, and there are T&E or title and escrow teams out there that specialize. You should have relationships with multiple T&E teams based on experience and specialization. Different asset types require different protocols, different inspections, different filings, so title would have to file differently on certain things, maybe even at the end to simply record the transaction. Different filings could be required based on the type of transaction or the type of asset. Different disclosures, of course, different certifications, different tax implications, and how title files this or states this or prepares these docs, whether it's a note, a seller carry note, whatever it could be, whatever instrument it could be or anything, could have a direct impact on your clients. So you need a title team that is familiar with this type of transaction, this type of asset, specializes in it, has done plenty, and yes, you can interview title. Why do you think all these reps come in here every week with cookies and business cards and whatever else? They've been severely restricted thanks to RESPA. They can't take us to the golf course anymore. You know, sorry. They can't, you know, send me my limo so I can go to wine tasting.
You can send us that though, if you just do commercial, right?
Huh?
What if you just do commercial? Is that okay? Is it different?
It's slightly different because
Okay.
It is, right?
I've been asked out to some drinks over there.
RESPA hones down on what they can do
Yeah.
in terms of business development, and they've just been severely restricted. So that's gone.
Be
All that's
careful, man.
gone. And I remember those days when they would tell us, we'd go to the office and everyone was excited, like, oh, what's going on? Oh, you know, property ID or somebody's here, or titles there, or Fidelity's downstairs. They're sending 2 limos, they're gonna take us all wine tasting. Now, not everyone could go, because I got a client coming, I can't go, but yeah, hell yeah, what time?
Yeah.
And so we just go down there, we pile into the party limos, and they take us wine testing, we come back to the office drunk and with a bunch of Fidelity stuff in our hands, calendars and desk blotters and all kinds of crap. I'm like, who was that? And then next week there'd be another one. Well, they're not allowed to do that anymore, but they can still entertain you, and they still definitely want your business, and they will work to get it. They can't buy it from you anymore. They can't, you know, treat you like that anymore, or treat you to this, that, kind of like lobbyists do in politics, but you can't do that anymore. The good ones have mastered going up to the line. They know exactly what they can do, and you can get a lot out of it, but yeah, just don't abuse them, because they really do work hard, and you know, they really want your business, and you know, they can't carry that company credit card anymore and just like splurge, take the whole office out to lunch. And these weren't planned events. They just show up and be like, who wants to go to lunch? Got the card. And we'd all just pile in and go to lunch. Sometimes with caravan and vehicles, be like 30 of us going in, and no sweat, because title companies have buku money. So they didn't care. They wrote it off to business development. They just can't do that anymore. But be sure your team knows this type of deal, and don't be afraid to ask. And again, you don't have to know all the nuances of that deal, but you want to make damn sure that they do. And they'll be honest, their office, so they'll tell you if their office, oh, we don't have a lot of experience in that, or we don't really specialize in that, or we don't do that. Some transactions they just don't do. And they'll tell you. Commercial transactions can have numerous terms to settle on. That's why we use the LOI. So every deal starts with the LOI. So take a look at the LOI I passed out to you earlier. This is an example. One of your fellow Russell team members is working on behalf of her client. And this was an LOI submitted for the purchase of a Chevron station in Antioch. Purchase price, 5.4 million even. But you can see item 3 is a due diligence period. There's a property description, item 1. The intro paragraph introduces the clients and what the expressed interest is, whether it's in acquiring it or leasing it or whatever. So that's where you would define the interest. Back in the day, we used to call these letter of defined intent. All the documents involved are also still within that diligence item number 3. Finance and contingency period. Contingency period extensions, and that's what Rich was mentioning. So in terms of what extensions are allowable, what we're going to, how we're going to present them and be able to execute or exercise that extension, that right of extension, that's spelled out specifically right here. The deposit even, the EMD that's expected, and the terms surrounding that, when it goes hard, when it's at risk, when it, which means when it's essentially no longer refundable. Closing. Closing is detailed in the LOI as well. Conditions to close. Commissions, item number 9. I know you guys are all interested in that one. This is a unique transaction because it's a business broker, so the gas station owner who's selling is not paying a commission. So the business broker is essentially representing as like a FSBO. So your team member is going to earn a commission, but that commission is going to be paid by her client. I mean, it always is anyway. It's what they fund in escrow, and the seller pays the commissions or forfeits a certain amount to pay closing costs and real estate commissions. But do you have a question?
Oh, no.
Oh, I do that too. I know. Wondering where'd the hair go?
It's some fun writer stuff.
So just keep this, take a look at it. Please don't contact the client or the seller. I should have blacked it out, but I was like in a hurry, so I just kind of printed it out and gave it to you. So it's a good example. We're going to go through that right now. But this really is the backbone of every commercial transaction, whether you're leasing, doesn't matter. Whatever it is, the LOI is the backbone. If you're representing the seller, then what you expect or want from the buyer or from the agent representing the buyer is this LOI. You want to begin to hash out terms through the LOI. You don't want to see a purchase contract. Not yet. It's too early stage. Negotiations occur through the LOI process. Much more efficient to negotiate via the LOI, like I said, than passing on a purchase offer or PSA and then followed by a whole litany of addendums and modification of terms. Much more efficient to do it this way. It's not binding upon either party. It's not a contract. It's basically an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding. Here's what we've discussed thus far. If you're in agreement to it, then we can stop the back and forth and you can sign it, and then you understand that the contract will be drafted based on the last revision of the LOI. The signed, the last revision executed. Once parties agree on the terms of the LOI and execute the LOI, it's time to draft the actual binding item, PSA or lease agreement, whatever it is. The LOI becomes the outline or boilerplate for the formal binding document. Does everyone understand what I'm saying there? So the LOI itself is not binding, even though it requires signature. The signatures in the execution, what is going on with my voice? The signatures in the execution are simply to kind of codify that these are the terms that we both agree to, and that we then agree to go on and have an actual binding item drafted and completed based on everything that we've agreed to here. This document alone, even though it's signed, is not binding. It's a non-binding term sheet, basically. Other alternatives, the LOI, MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, Preliminary Term Sheet, Proposal Summary, Offer Memorandum. And that's just basically semantics. The LOI is probably the best one to go with because it allows for the most fluidity going back and forth and changing terms and kind of actually negotiating. So understanding that, are any of you at a point where you're ready to do LOI? Are you at LOI status on any prospective deal, or? Because, and I ask that because if you are, then let's talk about that. You have an example here, but I have lots of templates, but also I have an understanding of obviously what that means, how it's done, how it should be drafted, and what should absolutely be included. So if you're at that stage with any commercial deals or commercial prospective deals, then please get on my calendar, let's sit down and talk about that, and let's hash it out together. Because here is where you, early stage, truly represent your client. This is your first opportunity to really, in binding the deal, this is your first opportunity to really represent your client. So you don't want to get it wrong. Yeah.
So now, we wanna be in contact with the seller beforehand, right? We wanna talk to them, we wanna know if they're interested in bringing in someone to take over the lease or to purchase a property. We wanna talk to them beforehand.
So that's CREST session 1, recognizing it, 1 and 2, kind of recognizing the opportunity, and then making your approach, packaging the deal, the opportunity, and making your approach to the involved parties or the principals, so like the property owner. So yeah, absolutely. You will have, by the time you get here, you will have already done that. Even if you represent both buyer and seller, you still need an LOI. Because you're going back, so in other words, instead of going, I don't know if they need this or not, but here's your one principal, here's the other. They'll have their agent, then there's you, and you're representing your client. If there's another agent involved, then let's say this is the buyer and this is the seller. The LOI is generated by the buyer and his or her agent. Then it's passed to the other agent who then represents it to their client, and you negotiate in this fashion. If there's only one agent and it's you, you still need the LOI. So you sit down with your buyer and you discuss terms. You draft the LOI. Then you turn around and you present it to your seller. They're gonna have modifications or changes or comments or counter certain terms or items. You're gonna make those changes and you're gonna go back to your buyer and say, here's what he countered with. So you still need the LOI, even if you represent both interests. And when you're doing that, that's really where some of that stuff I was talking about earlier comes into play about be mindful always that you have a fiduciary to both sides. You represent both parties' interests equally. So as you're discussing the terms here, you're doing so with the best interest of your buyer in mind. When you go back here and your seller's talking about countering services, well, I don't know if I want to cover the cost of that. Well, I don't know if I want to give them 90 days. I think 60 ought to be sufficient. That's their interest. That's what they want. You've got to be mindful of both, and that's where the compromise comes into place. You are the chief compromiser. Yeah.
You do agency commercial, is it the same form as the residential form, or is it a different form?
Yeah, same form, agency disclosures,
It's
like
not
I
a
said.
commercial specific form.
Because that's regarding the nature of the representation, not the nature of the asset and transaction, where you're buying or selling or leasing or the activity. It's just the representation. So those documents are pliable, whether it's commercial or residential. Everyone understand this. It can be a fine line to walk, but you can walk it. And when you do what I said on the earlier slides, which was keep in mind that one thing. Things can serve either individual, and they will, but then truly compromise things or the right way to go will serve the deal. So you're looking for things going back and forth that serve the deal, not necessarily just the seller or just the buyer. Serve the deal. Your job is to serve, you have 3 fiduciaries. You have a fiduciary to the buyer in a double-ended commercial transaction. You have a fiduciary to the seller, but you, because you created all this mess, you have a fiduciary to the deal. The deal is your client also. The deal really wants to happen. Everyone kinda got that? It sounds kinda, but the deal is actually a party in the transaction and probably your chief client.
Deal helps everybody.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about the money. Everyone in here pretty much understands the process of financing a home on a residential side, right? Clients gotta get pre-qualified, how much home can they afford? There's a differential between pre-qualified and pre-approved. You know, it's a mortgage. You're gonna get them to look at terms, rate, cost, origination, whatever it might be. You're gonna get them a term sheet, and they're gonna look at it, and they can shop different mortgages, different lenders. Commercial's kind of similar in that whatever you're doing, it's gonna cost somebody some money. It's money they probably will most often not have in their pocket. So where do they get the money? Same sources, lenders, but there's some additional sources. So there's conventional commercial finance, which is your bank finance, Chase Commercial. Chase has a wonderful commercial division, and they do a lot of money in commercial loans. That's brick and mortar bank commercial. There's private money. Investors, large or small, it's all private money. So I'm an investor. I'm not necessarily an equity player in the deal. I'm not involved principal, but I want to put my money in the deal. What would the benefits be to me of putting my money in the deal? Anyone?
Yeah, well, you're gonna get a return on your money. or the
Exactly.
interest.
I'm putting my money in the deal because I want or expect to get a return, and that's discussed. Sometimes I'm going to carry paper. I'm going to carry a note. Sometimes it may be an equity provision. Sometimes it's just a straight ROI, cash. Sometimes it's a percentage of the cash flow moving forward if it's a cash flowing or revenue generating asset. But it's private money, meaning it didn't come from a bank, it's not institutional. It can be your parents, that's private money. It could be a hedge fund, that's private money. So anything outside of the banking system is private money. Hard money? Anyone know what hard money is?
Expensive.
Expensive. Yeah, that's a good summation of hard money.
Shorter time frame.
Short term, excellent, thank you. So short term, expensive money. Hard money solutions require an exit strategy. Hard money's not in it, you're not gonna get a 30-year fixed hard money loan. Doesn't exist. Your hard money is typically gonna be short-term money, 1 year to 3 years.
Usually to like fix things up or do some
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah. So it's money that you can afford mainly because you're not gonna be carrying the debt for an extended period of time. So if the cost of money, the cost of funds as we call it, COF, if it's high to service that debt on a monthly basis, you wanna be in and out of that money as quickly as possible. So you talk to flippers who use a lot of hard money, that's why they're always on the clock. They're like, because we gotta get the hell out of this. We got 30 days. We're already into this thing 60 days. That's a monthly payment. So they're trying to get out of that debt. Even if they hold the asset, at the end of the project, they're gonna refinance to a conventional first mortgage and pay off the hard money. That's why most hard money lenders, they don't charge you pre or early payment penalties, because they understand the name of the game is to get in and out. They want you out. They don't want to, some of them have limited funds. They don't want you carrying it, even though they're making money on it, on the debt service monthly. They want out too. So they'll come at you, they appreciate a good, well thought out exit strategy. Just be prepared and have your clients prepared that it's expensive money, high origination, high interest rate. That's why it's short term. Higher origination is no joke. It could be like, give me a hard money origination.
Talking about 12 points and 14%.
Yeah, that's extreme. I mean, you can get hard money now, probably a 10% interest rate, but you're still going to be paying 7 or 8 points on the origination. maybe 6, 7 on a lender that you have a relationship with. So typically in the scale, and when we're talking about commercial finance, you've got conventional commercial finance, like the Chase, the institutional commercial money, and that's here on the interest rate. And then you've got soft money, which is a shade below hard money, and that could be your private money, your private lenders and so forth. So soft money, which is a little bit more costly than conventional. Then you've got hard money above that, which is very expensive. So you've got conventional, soft money, and then hard money. And as you look at that and consider those options, you're considering from the scale from the bottom up, conventional is going to be long-term commercial finance, soft money is going to be mid-term, and hard money is definitely short-term. And in the cost, conventional, institutional, commercial finance is going to be the least costly for the longer duration. The soft money is going to be that mid-term in cost and duration, and then hard money is going to be that very short-term, very high cost. Bridge finance, anyone know what that is? Bridge money, a bridge loan,
So
bridge
bridge
finance?
would be the money, let's say if you're building something
Say
from
that
the ground
again?
up, if you're building from the ground up, where you have your purchase money, you have your construction loan and then your purchase loan, so you need something in between to bridge those two.
It is exactly as it sounds. It's a bridge. So you're at point A, you've got your first round financing that got you to point A. Maybe that was the acquisition of the asset. Then you have a point B threshold, or C, and you lack the funds to get from A to B. It's just a short-term bridge loan to bridge that gap. Maybe you've got second round funding coming in, and maybe that's coming in at point C. So you've got A, B, and C. So if you've got initial round financing or funding coming in for the acquisition at point A, and you've got to get to point C before you get your next round of financing, you might need some funds to get there to bridge that gap between A and C. That's bridge money, a bridge loan. That's very simplistic, stating it very simplistically, but that's essentially what it is. And bridge money is available through soft money, private money, hard money, and some institutional commercial lenders will provide bridge loans as well. Especially maybe if they provided the first round of financing, it behooves them to provide a bridge to get you to your next round of finance, your next level of finance. Otherwise, they screwed themselves. So sometimes you can go back to your conventional round one financier and I need a bridge to get from here to here. Seller carry, seller finance, very common at our level, where you're dealing with individuals. Sellers are often willing to carry, stay in the deal, keep interest in the deal for cash flow out. So they're looking at a sustained residual income by staying in the deal, letting you do your thing, but providing finance. Be very mindful of subordination. Very mindful of subordination. So in a seller scenario, you would prefer to have that seller subordinate. If they're going to provide financing and the seller carry or a note, you prefer, you're representing your client, to have them provide that finance in a subordinate position. So there'll be a junior loan or a second, not the first position mortgage. And the reason why? Somebody tell me.
They won't get financing from like a major institution.
So bring back Chase Commercial. They're not going to subordinate to Joe Seller. No, we're providing the bulk of the finance or whatever. Even if we're not going to subordinate to a seller note. We have to be in first position. Hard money lenders, just like us, they won't subordinate. I've been doing this a very long time. I've never come across a hard money lender willing to subordinate. Ever. They don't care if you have a second, a third, a fourth, or a fifth, as long as they're in first.
That was the first thing mentioned yesterday, too.
Yeah. you got a seller who's actually willing, or not willing to subordinate, but, provide the finance, but he will not subordinate. So, in that scenario, if your buyer's coming in with cash, or they're very cash resourced, or, they've got plenty of liquidity, and capital, then that's okay, because they're gonna provide the rest of the acquisition in cash. They don't need to go to Chase. So you've got cash down, you've got the seller finance, he's the only note, he's in first position, he's happy, you're happy. But if your seller had to, in addition to that seller, if your buyer, in addition to that seller carry, had to go to the bank and get a loan, then that meeting doesn't work for you, because you're like, you're not willing to subordinate. That's gonna be a problem, because, we need to head to Chase when we're done here. Chase. Yeah, and they're not gonna subordinate. Or we need hard money, and they're not gonna subordinate. So, these things all come into play at the negotiation table and the LOI as well. Obviously, this goes without saying. No different in a residential transaction. Let's say the POF. Everyone know what a POF is? Proof of funds. Can be a bank statement. Can be a certified financial doc from an accountant. P&L. Tax statement, tax documents. But you want to make sure that it's legit, obviously. Could be a 401k statement, an investment fund, or commodities account. Could be their stock account statement or whatever. And understand the transfer rate too, or the time. So if it's presented, it's from a certain type of account, understand that that's not, if it's not a bank account, understand that that's not liquidity. So there's going to be, obviously you can see the money's there, but there's going to be a 3 or 5 day delay in transferring that into liquidity for this transaction to go into escrow. So be mindful of that as well. Not everything can be accessed, even though it's their money or it represents capital, not everything can be accessed in an instant.
So like if you're saying they're borrowing from a qualified plan, like a 401 or something.
Yeah, that can take
something
time.
like that.
It doesn't take forever, but it can take time. Sylviana has a client who's buying Salvador's listing in Fair Oaks. Yeah. Almost $1 million, but he's paying cash, and it's just a transfer from his 401k. Required a letter, some sort of submission doc. That's pretty much it. The whole process is taking like 7 days. Transfer his funds from his 401k, the wiring instructions from title, the money will be wired in 100%. So we talked about in CREST session 2 that you would often be responsible for conveying the deal or the vision to other third parties, not necessarily just the buyer, not necessarily just the seller. Sometimes you need to go and have a conversation with the lender, because if you don't, well, your client certainly can't do it. Who can explain the vision better than you? You created it. You don't leave your client to go into the bank and they're like, well, see, here's what we're doing. What had happened was, no, you want to do that. So you can go with your client, and your client can say, I brought my real estate agent to explain or detail the scenario here, and then you talk. So don't be surprised. Remember, above and beyond, your role doesn't just stop at, at escrow, at open escrow. There's a lot more involved. That's that all hands on deck, totally hands on. That's what I was referring to. Stuff like this. You gotta go in and talk to the lender and explain. So the lender's like, what the hell are you guys trying to do? And you've got to break it down and explain it. And they're like, oh, okay, I got you. Yeah, we can do that. So here's what I suggest, we'll do a round one, then we'll do a bridge, and we'll do this. And so, once they get it, they know their stuff. But they have to have an understanding of the deal, of the vision of the scenario, so they understand how to best apply their stuff to the transaction to get it done. And oftentimes, your client won't be able to do that. Not a hope in hell, your client won't be able to do that. It's gonna require you to go in directly by phone or in person and break it down for the lender. And then sometimes we even find out, oh no, we can't do that. No problem, then we'll find a lender who can. So you go back and you let your client know, well, we broke it down, it turns out that's not something they're comfortable doing, that's not something they can do. Or they can only do it with this rate and terms, which doesn't, work for the deal. So we need to find a new lender. That's why in commercial, one of the reasons, not totally why, but one of the reasons why you have such extended diligence periods. Because things in this realm take time. So occasionally you may need to detail the vision for lenders, investors, etc. Protect the vision, use third-party NDA. What's an NDA?
Non-disclosure agreement.
Yeah. It just binds the parties under penalty of going around you, circumventing you, or disclosing details of the deal that you may deem proprietary to other parties or to anyone else. I mean, what if it's a great opportunity on this corner here and you've got to make a disclosure to a third party, maybe it's a lender or another investor, and they're like, yeah, I don't know about this thing. And then as soon as you leave, they're on the phone with their investment club telling them, we gotta get this parcel. People are gonna do it anyway, but the NDA protects you and your client if they do. Under penalty, fiscal penalty. And if you need NDAs, I have those templates as well, so better safe than sorry. They're not like 10 pages long. I have a couple that are like a page and a half or 2 pages.
So how enforceable are those NDAs?
They're enforceable. It's a legal document. It's enforceable. I mean, you have to pay to get your attorney involved, and it's going to cost you to enforce it, but it is enforceable. Acquisition by entity. Anyone ever come across in a transaction where it was not an individual you were dealing with? It was an entity, LLC,
Trust.
corporation, trust, general partnerships, etc. Sometimes commercial requires creativity. Sometimes it's not always optimal for your client to take possession in their name or as an individual. Sometimes, whether it's tax implications or whatever the reasons may be, liability issues, protection or shield from liability, it makes sense for them to take possession as an entity or in the name of an entity which they control. Familiarize yourself with the processes of commercial real estate and understand when such an entity application makes more sense for your client. They may not know. It's incumbent upon you to know.
So with that, but in that situation, wouldn't it be more advisable for them to ask their CPA or their attorney versus us? Because we have to know their whole situation. Yeah, because if we advise them, we could be on the.
You're liable, you can be.
Yeah.
So readily consult title. SOS, that's the Secretary of State. Secretary of State website and other online resources and other resources in general. It's your job to eliminate what they may not see, just from an advisory perspective. Understand the basic processes of entity formation, how to form an LLC, how to form a corporation, do the name search. Be able to advise on how to use the SOS website or other self-incorporation websites like incorporate.com and stuff like that. And then to Michael's point, always recommend clients seek the opinions and advice of certified professionals. That's your disclaimer. That's your living vocal disclaimer. CPA, consult your tax professional, please, or your tax preparer, attorneys, and those are fees that they would encumber encumber or incur to seek that guidance, but it's well worth it, and you advise them that it is well worth it. You can give them ideas, you can give them suggestions. So you can say, you know, I've had clients in the past who've taken possession of this type of asset with the other partners involved, as such as you have, under an LLC. So that's a suggestion. Now, what I recommend is that you talk to your tax preparer, your accountant, or your attorney on what the implications or impact would be of taking possession of this asset under this LLC like that. I'm not here to advise you on those implications or that impact. I'm just here to suggest that it may be more beneficial for you to take possession as an LLC or C Corp or an S Corp or form a living trust. What do we say? Commercial deal. Now, by the end of this CREST sessions, by the end of this whole series, I'm going to have you guys yelling out, commercial deals don't happen to you. Commercial deals don't happen for you. Oh my God, I'm losing my voice. Commercial deals happen because of you, right? Any questions?